In this module, we're going to introduce the concept of common action blocks. Picking up where we left off with our sample logon procedure step, the next stage, we've entered a user ID and password, is we want to validate the user ID and password. So we could start to add in some statements directly into this procedure step to do the validation, but we may want to use the same logic from somewhere else. And also, if you place all of the code for your entire application in a single procedure step, it becomes way too unwieldy. So the idea with a common action block is essentially like similar to most programming languages, where you have a subroutine that you can invoke, and that subroutine can contain common code that could be invoked from multiple places. So these are called common action blocks, or just action blocks for short. So right now in our model we just have the logon procedure step action block, and I'm going to create a new action block which I'm going to call validate password, and I'm just going to change the source name to make it a bit more specific to the function validate pwd. Press OK, and here is my action block. And I'm going to start off by putting in a standard changelog note and maybe a description of what the action block does. In this case, maybe I want to use LDAP to validate the password, so I don't have to store the passwords in my own system. So an action block has similar views to a procedure step: imports data coming in, exports data leaving the action block, local views, attributes that are local to this action block, and entity action views for database access, which we'll cover in a subsequent module. In my procedure step, I already have my work view logon work, and I'm going to pass that directly into validate password. So rather than define these again, I'm going to select them, use Control-C for copy, and select the import view, Control-V, and that's pasted in. And I'm going to want to return a value to specify whether the logon was successful or not, or the validation was successful. And to do that, I'm going to create a new work set, which I'm going to call result, and I'm going to create a code attribute which will be numeric length 4, and a message attribute which will be 255 characters, case sensitive. So there's my result work set, and I'm going to use that as my return code from this common action block. So it's a work view. I'm going to call it out, and I'm using the result work set, code, and message. So there's my import views, my export views, and now I'll just put in some sample logic. For example, maybe validate that the user ID and password are not blank, and if they are, that's an error. And then escape. And then I'm going to put in a note. I'm not going to do the LDAP validation code at the moment here, so I'm just going to put in a special type of note, which is a to-do note. And then I'm just going to Control-C, Control-V, copy these, and just just in case I forget to do this, we'll always know about it. Here my to-do note is to-do is a special keyword, and you can see in the right hand side here where a to-do note is present, there's this little blue marker here indicating that you need to where the to-do note is. And the nice thing about Studio Developer is you've got a search and replace, so I could search for to-do in my action diagrams and bring up all of my action diagrams, in this case just one, which have a to-do note in them. So if I want to check whether I've completed all of my activities that I've deferred to later, it's a very simple way of finding all my to-do notes and then going ahead and fixing them. So there's my common action block developed, and now I need to invoke it, and the way we do that in CAGen is with a use statement. And if I just press the space bar, I could either add a new action block, which is another way of adding a new one, or invoke my validate password. And you'll see here for the use statement there are two parameters. One is the imports views, the second is the export views. So the validate password has the logon work, so what I want to do is view match, and here I have a choice. I could view match my import view or my export view into the import of validate password, and in this case it wouldn't make any difference. As a matter of a standard, I normally use the export view, and the reason for that is you'll remember that whilst I cannot change import view values, I can change export view values. So for example, if I wanted to modify the user ID, for example, if the import user ID equals something like that, I may want to change it. So if they type in admin is, I change it to admin, and by using the export view I'm making sure that if I do modify the view values at all, then it's the modified value that's passed into the common action block. And then I need to map my return code results workset back into my procedure step, and right now I don't have any views of that workset, so I need to add a new view. And I have a choice of matching it to a view in the local section or the exports. Note I can't match it to an import view because imports cannot be changed. So in this case I'm going to choose a local view, and Studio Developer has automatically suggested the name of temp, so I can choose that. Now in the last exercise in module 3, you may have noticed when I copied my view section from my view from one section to another, the name was automatically adjusted from out to in, or in this case from out to temp. And the way that Studio Developer is able to do that is through, in the preferences, in the view section of the preferences, I can specify that when I'm substituting, when I'm doing a view copy, it substitutes these keywords. So if the view is an import view and it starts with in, then that in is replaced with, if I'm copying it to an export view, out, or to a local view, temp. And in this example I was view matching an export view called out, so that matched that into a local view, and therefore it substituted it for temp. And then you can specify whether the default section is a local view or an export view. In this case I've chosen local, so it's suggested by default view match it to a local view. So in that way, when you're copying views, you very easily get suggested view names that meet your standards without having to type in the view name most times. So now we've called or used our common action block. We now need to test the return code. So I might want to say something like, if the temp result code is greater than or equal to 8, then I'll output a message box with the message, and the title will be error, and I'll just put a critical icon on there. And then maybe else if the return code is greater than or equal to 4, and I'll just copy that and paste it in. And then this one is a warning, and it's no longer critical, so I'll just put in an exclamation icon. Now if it's an error, we don't want to carry on, so I'm also going to escape. And then finally, I've already put in this validation in my common action block, so I don't need it here. I'll just take that out, and we'll just use the logic within the validate password. So I'll save that. So now we can test that, and if we go back to our window generation, you'll see here that it's automatically detected that I've added a new action block as part of logon and suggested I need to generate the code. So I can go ahead and process that. And test it. We can try both these things at the same time. And then we get the warning, password validation not performed, and the user ID has been changed to admin. So that's tested that okay. So just to summarize, with any logic that you may want to repeat or call from different places, you can put that into this action block. The action block can be invoked from multiple places, and also simplifies the calling action block by not having to duplicate that logic, and also allows you to not have these hugely long action blocks, but divide up the code into more manageable chunks. So that concludes the introduction to action blocks, and as an exercise you may want to create some additional action blocks to perform some functions and practice using them and performing the view matching.